Hope you're doing good today. Just want to welcome you and thank you for being here. My name is Eric. I am an infant adoptee and I'm sharing my story in hopes that it will help other adoptees either identify with me and maybe understand how they feel internally, what's going on internally, because it's very confusing. I'm a transracial adoptee. I'm Latino, Chicano, adopted into an all-white family. We moved from California to Georgia at 7, so it was all white and black people out there, and it was very, very confusing for me. So I'm just sharing my story to help educate others, and I guess learn from my experience. I've been studying adoption for the past 5, 10 years. I don't even know how long. I've been studying, looking for answers literally since I was like 10, 11, 12, because of what I'm going to show you in this presentation, which is adoption fog. I have been studying, just looking for what is going on internally, what is happening to me, why do I have so much more issues than my friends, my peers, and you know, everybody else just seems to be speaking in ways that don't really register to me. So putting words to our pre-verbal trauma is paramount. It's so vital for adoptees because when we're children, we don't really know what's happening to us, and we trust our parents. At least I trust my parents, and I thought what they were saying was true, that they saved me, that, I should be grateful that I was lucky, and all my family and friends said, I haven't been through anything hard, and that I should listen to them and everybody around me. And then I just, nothing really got solved, and I had a very, very interesting life. So I'm really hoping that you get help from this. I put a lot of work into it. In this slideshow, we're going to be going over vocabulary and just some of the common sort of basic words that I wish I knew when I was growing up that I was never taught. I've never heard these in years of therapy. I was in AA for on and off for 10, 15 years, never heard anything like this. Professionals, they just didn't teach me about my adoption. My parents didn't teach me about my adoption. So I'm here to help kind of lower the learning curve, I guess, shorten the learning curve. So let's get into it. So, as I put here, putting words to our inner experiences can be life-changing. My YouTube channel is Adoptee Out of the Fog, and eMason on Instagram is where my personal IG is. You can check it out if you want. And let's get into the next slide. So what does pre-verbal trauma mean? We do not have the words for our experience as children. So I'm not going to read this entire screenshot, but I've screenshotted these for you guys if you want to pause the video and read it. I'm just going to go over it, and then each slide I'll speak a little bit about my experience, and I really, really do hope that helps you. I'm not speaking for validation or anything like that, but identification for other adoptees. So, pre-verbal trauma. It can occur before a child can verbalize their emotions, and experiences can have a profound impact on their developmental and well-being, particularly in the context of adoption. Some key findings: early separation and loss, brain development, increased risk in anxiety and depression. I have had horrible, horrible anxiety and depression. I used to break out in sweats, and my mom used to always be like, "You don't have to figure everything out, Eric." And I didn't know where it was coming from. And the next one is hyperarousal and delayed development, impaired attachment, split psyche. Now this one is very interesting because going through all of these programs and treatment centers and trying to figure out what the root cause is of what's going on with me, I was almost self-diagnosed by my family as borderline personality disorder or bipolar or whatever, but I never really thought I was. I thought it had something more to do with something else, and it turns out it is actually adoption. And there's a lot of that we'll get into about the split psyche, but to keep going, it's number 7 is inheritance of trauma. Number 8 is importance of adult support. And I hope you guys read this, and the one other goal is to do your own research and get your own ongoing education. But the takeaways are: it's a significant factor in adoption, emotional regulation, and attachment. We we are at an increased risk for suicide, depression, and we're overrepresented in mental institutions and treatment centers, and it just still seems like there's a very big misunderstanding from professionals and just even adopted parents. And I don't mean to offend anybody, but it just seems like there's a lot of people that really do not understand the complexities of adoption and pre-verbal trauma. So the next one is The Primal Wound. So this is a book written by Nancy Newton Verrier, and it's probably one of the most recommended books for adoption, infant adoption at least, because most parents and people that I talk to think babies are blank slates, that you can just adopt them and they'll be fine and there'll be no issues. And if they have issues later on in life, it has nothing to do with adoption. But the primal wound develops when a mother and child are separated shortly after birth. It describes a mother and child as having a vital connected relationship with a physical, psychological, and physiological, and examines the effects of disrupting such bonds. So this just clicked for me as an adoptee that was told to be lucky, to be grateful. This whole book helped, pretty much was the foundation of me coming out of the fog. And coming out of the fog it's not like a one-time thing. It's little aha moments and little realizations about, oh, this is all the dots are being connected. I don't really, nobody ever taught me this stuff, so I had to learn all this on my own. And the primal wound is just such a vital piece to the puzzle of working with an adopted child, understanding adopted children, and what really goes on when you separate a child from their mother for adoption. You have to know this if you're adopting or if you're an adoptee and you believe there's no loss. Disenfranchised Grief. This one can be a big game changer. This one I just learned about this year, and it really helped me put words to what I'm feeling in my internal experience. The grief doesn't really go away when you lose your mother in real life. Like, I lost my adopted mom in 2010, and I always say that it was somewhat easier than losing my mother from birth, because nobody acknowledged that I lost my mother. Nobody. I still, not to this day, nobody's ever said, hey, you really lost your mother at birth. My family said that, I was lucky that I was adopted. So that leads to disenfranchised grief. So what is it? It's a term it describes the fact that some forms of grief are not acknowledged on a personal or societal level in our modern culture. People might not like how you may not be expressing your grief or view your loss as insignificant. And that's the worst thing as an adoptee, is have real serious trauma, the overwhelming feelings of loss and grief, and just don't know what it is. And people are like, you don't have any loss. You don't have any grief. You have nothing to complain about. I gave you everything. You have everything. What are you talking about? So it's dismissing everything that's going on inside of infant adoptee that's growing up and doesn't really know what's happening to them. And that is called disenfranchised grief. Okay, so adoption fog. This is the basis of my channel. My channel is to help people understand what adoption fog is and how to come out of it and what it took for me to come out of it. I mean, I was studying for decades looking for what was going on with me, and it's just something that I can't even put into words how long I've been looking for answers. I came out of the adoption fog at age 38 after my son was born, a year after he was born, and really saw the genetic mirroring that I never had. And it's hard to put into words, but what is it? It is fear, obligation, and guilt. So I put, if you were never out of the fog to begin with, how do you even know you're in the fog? Just something to think about, because you're born into it. All the things we're told I'll get into. Are you believing your own internal experiences or what your adopted parents, friends, non-adopted people have told you to think and feel about your own adoption story? If you're an adoptee reading this, I really want you to think about that. Whose story are you believing? And I just really want you to have your own story, your own identity, your own history. And if it's that you're grateful for your adoption, that's great. I really want you to know that it's yours and yours alone. Because it took me a long time to realize what my story actually was, and it took a lot of work and studying. So I'm going to link all the articles and research that I talk about in the description box below for you to check out. Like I said, I've done a lot of research, and it's not to gloat or anything. It's just I seriously was extremely in a dark place in the adoption fog, and I needed answers, or just wasn't going to go well for me. So adoption fog continued. Where I got these resources was Out of the Fog by Dana Morningstar. And there's this great model of adoptee awareness. Out of the Fog into a Consciousness, a model of adoptee awareness. Listening to adult adoptees who are out of the fog. And I'm going to put this in the description box for you guys, but this is a great model of research and what it is. And it's better than I can explain. I mean, I'm just talking about my experience of it, but these are articles that really put legitimacy to it and explain it in a professional way. So fear, obligation, and guilt. How does it happen? So by being unaware or denying the primal wound, the trauma from relinquishment, being separated from your birth mother and family tree, losing your original birth certificate, your real name, your medical records, genetic mirroring, your family tree. I said that twice. Whoops. Sorry. Racial community, heritage, not understanding the 7 core issues of adoption and permanency, which I'm very big on. This channel, I believe it's in the words. It's core issues. So core issues. Believing others' story they tell us to believe. The common things you're told. You're so lucky. You should be grateful for your parents who saved you. Would you rather be an orphan or an orphanage? I know an adoptee and they're fine. They have extreme gratitude. You must have had a bad experience. Are you not grateful that your parents parented you? This is actually a comment that somebody commented on one of my videos. I should have clipped it, but going to therapy as an adopted child, all professionals that I went to, I mean 100% of professionals, and I was in therapy when I was like 15. Were not trauma educated. So this reinforced and dismissed all of the loss and trauma that I was dealing with. Racial, relinquishment. I was never taught that could be anything but, well, aren't you grateful? Even professionals told me that. So this reinforced that I was wrong. My parents were right. Society was right. I need to find a way to be more grateful. And could be nothing further from the truth. It happens by never being able to talk about your own adoption story in any real way to family members, other people, even professionals, to no one, and nobody really listening empathetically. Like, that's just a question for you. Have you been able to talk about your own adoption story in a real way? And if you don't have the words, how are you supposed to talk about it? If you can't put words to your adoption grief or relinquishment or the primal wound, how are you supposed to talk about it? I remember that feeling of like, what do I even say to people when I was younger? I'm like, what do I say? Like, I miss my biological family. I didn't have words for that. I didn't have words to say I miss my biological family. I really didn't. Coming out of the fog means realization of this trauma coming to light for adoptees, and involves the feelings and emotions start to flow. Rejection, grief, confusion, mourning, denial, anger, bargaining, and hopefully acceptance. That most people telling us how to think and feel have no lived experience, no education on adoption and history of the industry. I mistyped lived. I gotta proofread this better. Sorry, anyways. do not know what they're talking about. So most people that talk to me about adoption have zero idea what they're talking about. Zero. And that's most people online, most people I'd speak to in family when I have family meetings. they all say, well, at least you're lucky to have better opportunities. And this can really, really get in your head as a child. Um, Healing can begin when we acknowledge what is lost, when we educate ourselves on the 7 core issues of adoption and permanency. So, common ways adoptees come out of the fog. So, for me, having your own biological child, like I said, I came out of the fog a year after my son was born, seeing the same eyebrows, the same facial features. It was just, it was mind blowing for me. It really was the first time I felt like I saw my DNA in somebody else, my face in another human being. I met my brother, I met my birth mother, and still that didn't lead me out of the fog. It answered a lot of questions I had, but that really didn't lead me out of the fog. It was needed for me. But yeah, reading books and having your inner experience validated for the first time, feeling seen, heard, and understood, listening to adoptees for similarities in your own story, challenging what you were told in childhood about your own adoption and what society's beliefs are surrounding adoption, understanding your own adoption story that is uniquely yours and yours alone, sitting down and doing a life review, going through all your most traumatic experience that you can remember objectively, and being educated on maternal separation trauma, realizing our own needs as an adopted child may not have been met correctly or acknowledged even at all. Going to an adoption educated therapist that is an adoptee as well themselves. This can be a game changer if you have been in therapy as an adopted child and you are talking to a professional that does not understand adoption, trauma, the 7 core issues of adoption, grief, loss, racial identity, racial community. I mean, all the issues that can happen in adoption. I mean, it can be much more damaging to go to them. They can dismiss you. They can laugh at you and tell you and misdiagnose you like crazy. I mean, it can be so bad. This is speaking from experience. I've just had the most crazy experiences in therapy that there's adoptees that are teaching adoption therapy, or not adoption therapists, they're teaching therapists about their adoption, and the therapists are learning from our lived experiences. That's why it's so vital to listen to a lived experience. Microaggressions, this one's a big one because my inner thoughts as a child were, why are people so angry at me for no reason? Like, I remember just like this aggressiveness, like, what are you talking? What are you doing? Like this look and this feel of just like, why are you so mad? What is this? What is this? And it was microaggressions. You know, I was a brown child in a white family, and I hate to say it, but there was racism inside my extended family, immediate family, saying there was no color, they don't see color. I mean, just knowing that what the word is can be extremely helpful, and what common microaggressions are. Like I said, I'll put links to all these in the description, but knowing what these are, you can protect your child or you can protect yourself as an adoptee, knowing what some of the common ones are, you know, racial microaggressions or whatever it is. But yeah, this was a big one for me to learn. So this one is just, it's a comment or action that subtly and oftenly, unconsciously or unintentionally expresses prejudice, attitude towards a member of a marginalized group such as a racial minority. So being the only brown kid in my entire family, I had nobody around me that could stand up for me. So I was pretty much on my own, just dealing with people telling me that I was wrong. I have no voice. I didn't have a voice with anybody. I mean, it was really hard growing up with nobody that looks like you, and I really, really hope people understand what that's like through listening to my experience and other, you know, Black, brown, and Asian adoptees speaking their lived experience. It's really confusing. This is one for you guys. I'm not going to go through this, but you can pause it here and read this. But microaggressions and adoption, same thing. They're subtle, unintentional comments. Now, these can be from your adopted parents if they don't know race. It could sound like color doesn't matter. That means that you don't matter. Your body doesn't matter. I don't see you as a person, which, you know, if you see a car in your favorite color, you'll say, oh, I love that color, that's my favorite color, red. But then when you talk about your skin color that is part of you, a part of your identity, nope, I don't see it, I don't see you, color doesn't matter, you don't matter. And they'll say, that's not what you mean, it's on the inside that counts, that's what I mean. Well, that's not what we hear when we're little and we don't know what you mean. We just hear color doesn't matter, you don't matter. And it's our bodies, it's our race, it's our heritage, it's our family tree. It's much more than just our bodies. Narrative burden. So my inner thoughts as a child was, why do I keep getting asked all these questions? Why do I have to explain all this? And I didn't have any boundaries. So I'm like, oh, do I really have, it's that feeling of, oh my God, do I have to tell this whole story? And I feel like I can't say no. I feel like I don't want to talk about it. It's just this burden when we're asked this question. Oh, so what's it like being adopted? What's that like? And it's just like, ugh. And I put a great article by this guy, Robert Ballard. He wrote this whole thing about it, and it's really, really good. So boundaries, wonderful thing to learn. I mean, it's so vital to learn boundaries. I never had any boundaries. Like in adoption, it takes away so many just fundamental boundaries that it's so learned. If my parents didn't teach me any boundaries, I mean, none. I did not know how to stand up for myself. I was bullied like crazy racially. There was rocks thrown at my face in my neighborhood. I mean, people physically pushed me around. I was very small and I had a really hard time growing up in Georgia where nobody looked like me. My inner thoughts as a child was, why does nobody care about my needs? And I couldn't put this into words, but this is what I was thinking. I wanted to meet my biological mom. Professionals didn't care. My parents didn't care. It was a closed adoption. Obviously, they were not going to be open to me meeting my biological mother, but I asked about it about twice, and had this big breakdown about why didn't she want me, and all I got was, you were loved and given a better life, and just, that usual story. And it was just like, that was it. And I'm like, okay, I don't get to talk about that anymore. And then therapists didn't help at all. Needing to speak about my adoption, my race, what am I, why is no one else acting grateful and I need to be acting grateful? Why do people get to treat me like shit but I can't defend myself? That was my experience. So with lack of boundaries, we're asked invasive questions to complex experiences that lead to narrative burden and confusion. The limits we place for our physical, mental, and emotional needs are our boundaries that we need to be taught, we need to learn. So if no one teaches us different, we do learn coping mechanisms to survive, whether they work or not. They are our coping mechanisms. So they could be bad behaviors, in quotes, like acting out, I used to throw weights through my door. I mean, sorry, Mom. I used to throw dumbbells through my door because I was so angry. Nobody was listening to me. I didn't get to talk about my adoption. And then I was considered the problem child. Looking back, I never had anybody validate what was going on for me with the 7 core issues of adoption. And this can lead to anger. I mean, grief covered up is anger. Having no boundaries is like trying to play soccer with others that can see the lines, but we can't. How are you supposed to know where out of bounds is or where to play? That's the feeling of having no boundaries. I just remember the feeling of being just naked, going to school. Like, man, if somebody picks on me, I have nothing to say. I'm not allowed to say no. Like, it sucks. Okay, so gaslighting and adoption. This is so important to learn what it is, gaslighting and manipulation, what the words are. They're so common that most people don't even realize that they're gaslighting, and it can be very unintentional from loving people. It's kind of scary how often I hear these, but I wanted to play this from, I believe she's a psychologist, so let's listen to her tell us what it is. Okay, so I'm really new at this presentation slide stuff. The video didn't work as I wanted it to. And it's a few minute long video. So I'll link it in the description, but it's very important to listen to what these words are, what they sound like, because they're so common that it just could be normal, hearing that we need to be lucky, we need to be grateful, You shouldn't feel how you feel. Basically, if you think of it any way as anybody telling you as an adopted child how to think and feel, that could be considered gaslighting, because if it's not how you feel and nobody's truly listening and saying, "Oh, that's cool. Now I understand how you feel," it's gaslighting. I mean, because we have such complex history and inner experiences that non-adopted people do not truly understand. They can never speak for us. Our adopted parents shouldn't be speaking for us. Nobody should be speaking for us but ourselves. That's why it's so important to listen to lived experiences that are being shared in an open and honest way. So listen to that video. It is so important. After I listened to that video, I realized how much gaslighting was really going on in my family and online and just in the adoptee community. So please go listen to that. The Divided Self. So this is from The Journey of the Adopted Self by Betty Jean Lifton. My internal thoughts as a child, I was always asking myself, what is happening to me? Why does nobody seem to be able to tell me what is going on? Like, I'm so confused. Like, I felt like I was being kidnapped because I couldn't see my birth mother. And I told my mom, like, why can't I meet her? And she's like, no, until you're 18. So that was closed adoption. So it's like nobody seemed to understand what, or could put words to what I was going through. So this created the artificial self, which is known as the good adoptee, the forbidden self, which is known as the bad adoptee, and then the ghost kingdom, which is basically like fantasy land, where we think about our birth family or our life, what it could have been. So the artificial self, it is from the book. It is a social construct and as if self, living as if in a natural family, wanting to fit in at any cost. It will deny its own needs for the sake of others, people pleasing. It is canny and it senses what. Oh my God, I gotta proofread this more. I'm sorry. It senses what is acceptable and what is not, and will do anything to avoid confrontation, known as the good adoptee. The forbidden self often acts like the bad adoptee, keeps itself hidden in order to not be fleshed out and destroyed. It refuses to disavow the reality that it has other parents somewhere, or to abandon what it feels to be true or potentially true self. Great book. I recommend that to adoptees and adopted families. The Ghost Kingdom. So the forbidden self and occasionally the artificial self slips into the ghost kingdom to rendezvous with the lost mother and the lost baby who never had a chance to grow into the child it should have been. It's basically like a fantasy land. I believe that most adoptees have this. And part of the fog is saying that, I can't speak for anybody else but myself, but there's many adoptees who are in the fog and now out of the fog that say they said that this didn't exist and now they realize that it did. So it's just something to look out for. I'm not speaking for anybody else but myself and other adoptees that are out of the fog. So adoptees then are caught between the loyalty to the adopted parents who rescued them and then the invisible loyalty to the mother who gave birth to them. The loyalty to adopted parents is the number one thing keeping adoptees in the fog, because it is actually, in reality, offensive to the adopted parents to come out of the fog. It is. I mean, I can't deny it. It's not a beautiful thing to come out of the fog. It's just realizing what the reality is. The 7 core issues of adoption and permanency. These are vital to any adoptee that is in the fog or doesn't understand adoption or is learning about their adoption story. This is a model that was, I believe, 82, came out in 1982. Loss is the center of the model. Then there's rejection, shame and guilt, grief, identity, intimacy, and mastery control. This book is probably the 7 core issues in this book and the Primal Wound, probably the best 2 books out there in my experience. So loss, there's 3 different kinds of loss. This is from the book. ambiguous loss, vicarious loss, secondary loss. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but this says that ambiguous loss is a type of grief that or distress that arises from the uncertainty and complexity of adoption experiences. So it's just good to put words to what these losses are. If you want to pause it here, you can read that. Vicarious loss in adoption, the emotional pain and suffering experienced by individuals who are not directly involved in the adoption process but are affected by it. If you want to pause that here, you can read it, or just go get that book. It explains everything. It's so good. It really helped validate a lot of what I was going through that no one taught me. Still, people will argue with me today, even though it's my experience, and I tell them this is what I'm experiencing, and they're like, oh, it's not that bad. It's not, you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. Secondary loss, ongoing, cumulative, oh my God, I can't speak, cumulative and unacknowledged experiences of loss that adoptees face throughout their lives. It is a lifetime. And they can just keep happening, and then there's more losses because of that first loss. And yeah, it's just, health issues, relationship changes. This stuff, if it's never addressed, it can get bad. Relinquishment and maternal separation. This one is so vital to learn in adoption. If you're an infant adoptee and do not know about the primal wound or relinquishment trauma from maternal separation, it is just so vital. There's a lot of stuff that happens when you're separated from your mother. There's like doctors that have studied this, and it's not good. Even if you're given away and your parents didn't want you and you're given away for the best reasons that, oh, you're going for a better life, there is that trauma that is there. It's just there. So if you want to pause that and read that, it's so vital to learn. Exulansis. This really, really helped me out, because there's adoptees that talk to me and they're like, well, I was talking to a friend about my adoption and telling him my lived experience, and they said, well, I know an adoptee that they're adopted from internationally adopted and they're fine. That's like one of the main things that adoptees hear. Well, I know one and they're fine. And that is 100% just like dismissive. Your story doesn't matter. And just invalidating, gaslighting. Exulansis is the tendency to give up trying to talk about an experience because people are unable to relate to it. I stopped talking at age like 8 or 9 or 10, like so young. I just became the most quiet person that I knew it wasn't me, but I'm like, I can't talk about my adoption. I can't talk about my race. I can't talk about my birth mother. Nobody seems to really care about my needs, but they expect me to feel grateful. I'm going to figure out what's going on. And so I spent the next 30 years researching for what I now know, and that's what I'm sharing is what I had to go through. Exulansis can put a word to not having any words. Dissociation, can adoptees have it? I'll link this survey in the description box below, but yes, and it is not a fun thing to have. I dissociate too when I'm in social situations, and it's just like really weird. You kind of like don't feel like you're in your body or your mind. And it is something that we should learn as adoptees and adoptive families to look out for what it looks like. But this is a great article that I'll post in the description box. Genetic mirroring. So losing shared genetics through adoption. This happened with me. I grew up with nobody that looked like me. It's something that is also dismissed and like it's not important. Biology doesn't matter. It just I had biology, and people are saying that parents can be shitty either way, biological or not. And yeah, I guess that's true. But there is a loss of genetic mirroring when you're adopted. Like there's no way around it. That's just a loss that comes with it. Unless you're adopted with a brother or sister, but like many adoptees, they're just completely isolated a lot of times with these white families, and they're the only one that looks like them. And often we're brought into these neighborhoods and schools that are all white, and we stick out like a sore thumb to be picked on. And we go to our parents and we're like, hey, why is this happening? We don't have the words for it. We're getting racially attacked with the microaggressions and bullying, and nobody looks like us. So it can be so life changing when we find somebody that looks like us, that can talk to us and identify with us. PTSD and adoption. This is from Joe Soul's website. He's the author of Adopted and Healing, which is a great book. But PTSD and adoption is so misunderstood. I know I have PTSD because I have these recurring nightmares. Every night I'm stuck in a building. I'm always like in school and my parents drop me off and I can never get out of the building where I am. And I'm always in my old neighborhood where I grew up in Georgia. And it's just these recurring nightmares. And I always try to call my parents. I'm on the phone and they're never coming to pick me up. And I always thought this was kind of like, oh, I'm thinking of my parents. When I was in the fog, I'm like, oh, I have dreams of my parents. I must miss them. But really, they've never seen me. They've never heard me. And I could never reach them. So the calling them and trying to reach them and they never come. And obviously my mom dying, missing her, and that's hard to talk about. But just like never being seen, heard, or understood, I think I dream of them because I grew up with them. Obviously, they raised me. Never to be seen or heard or understood is horrible. I mean, it is very, very, very sad that us adoptees are never seen in our own homes. We don't see color, and that's how it happens. You don't think color matters. These white people are adopting kids of a different race and have no idea what race really means and how important and how much it actually matters. So please learn about PTSD and adoption. Allostatic load and adoption. This is one that I actually just learned on Instagram. So this is the cumulative, I cannot say this word, cumulative burden and chronic stress in life events. So it's basically the overtime, the life issues that build up and they kind of just lead to different problems. It's overload, being like hyper vigilant, hyper aware at all times, on high alert. It can create a lot of stress in the body. So if you want to pause this here, this is the last slide. Well, actually, there's one more. But this is the AI generated answers I got from Allostatic Load. If you want to pause that and screenshot it or read that. Okay, so honorable mentions. These are ones that I didn't include. But if you have been adopted, you've had an ACE, an adverse childhood experience. Being separated from your mother would be considered an adverse childhood experience. Being adopted, transracially adopted, raised in an all-white neighborhood, if you're black or white or Asian. I mean, if you're black or brown or Asian, like that is an adverse childhood experience. RAD and ODD are often usually just misunderstood grief. ACE is different, but RAD and ODD, through my experience in being an adoptee, it's just the grief is like the root issue. And if it's grief can lead to RAD is what I'm saying. Like if you have trouble attaching to your family, it's usually because of unresolved grief. And that's just my opinion. I'm not a doctor. This is just for entertainment purposes only. So, an ODD, I've never even heard that before. When I was growing up, I was angry, dude. I used to, like I said, throw weights through the wall. I'd be bullied, so I didn't know how to fight back. I wasn't taught any self-defense. I was told, not to defend myself. So I was always getting beat up and physically and racially bullied. So I really hope this helps. I really hope this puts some words to your inner experiences. If you're an adoptee watching this or an adopted parent, I don't mean to be offensive, but it's good to learn the words that your child or adoptees go through. So I really hope this helps. I know it was a long presentation, but I genuinely hope this helps. Hope you have a good day.